Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Pangaea Talks, and thank you once again for joining us for authentic thought leadership conversations with some of the world's leading family office professionals and enterprising global families. My name is Declan Ramsaran, and I'm the Managing Director of Pangaea Private Family Offices, and I'll be your host for this episode of Pangaea Talks. Today, I'd like to welcome you to what I believe to be one of the most valuable private sessions you will listen to this year. You're all part of a select group within a private circle that's been invited to go behind the headlines to understand how cybercrime disrupts family enterprises and the lives of affluent families. Family enterprises and affluent families are prime cybercrime targets. If you are attending this session or listening on the call after we've wrapped up, or if you're attending as a family member or as a private advisor to a family, we commend you for recognizing the significance of cyber threats in your lives and in the lives of the family members whom you serve. You see, awareness is the first step toward prevention, and you in attendance today are the few who are aware and are prepared to be further educated on this particular topic of how cybercrime affects the family enterprise. In preparation for our private session or our private talk today, I dedicated the time to get to know two experts, global experts, and they're also expert speakers on this topic. And I wanted to speak with them to really understand the tangible value that they bring to the table in working with families as it concerns cybercrime and cybercrime activity in their personal lives and in their family enterprises. And I must say that in speaking to them about what goes on behind the scenes in the world of cybercrime prevention, it catapulted me on an emotional roller coaster of feelings. I experienced everything from deep concern to disappointment, and then to frustration, and finally to relief. You see, according to our expert speakers that we'll be talking to today, 95% of the time that families address the issue of cybercrime, they do so after the breach or attack has occurred. What this actually means is that the damage is already done when it likely could have been prevented. Worth noting is that one successful attack means that the probability of repeat increases to 100%. In this private conversation, we aim to highlight the behavior that puts affluent families at risk and how they can mitigate their risk exposure to cybercrime. Joining us today from Vancouver, Canada, is Anwar Visram, CEO of Visram Security, and from London, UK, Mr. Frank Morey, CEO of Virtus Risk Management. Gentlemen, welcome and thank you so very much for taking the time to talk to us today. Why don't we start with Anwar? Please feel free to take a few minutes and share with our listeners and our families and the advisors on the call listening today a little bit about your background.
Sure. I am CEO of Visram Security with over 20 years of cybersecurity protection and technology management. I ran global security teams for multi-billion-dollar national companies, and now I take that experience to help both family offices, trusted advisors, and a broad spectrum of high net worth families with reputation and cybersecurity concerns.
Thank you, Anwar. I appreciate you saying so. Frank, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yes, hi. Thank you, Declan. I'm a security risk management advisor and CEO of Virtus Risk Management. Essentially, we're a security risk management and investigations firm that specialize in helping high net worth individuals and their family offices understand security risks and then help them to take steps to help manage and mitigate those risks effectively. We're truly a global business. Our clients are from all over the world, and we run projects all over the world also. And I'm very much pleased to be part of this presentation and this seminar today, this webinar, and hopefully go some way to raise awareness of the issues with cybercrime and no doubt work together to help mitigate those risks.
Excellent. Thank you, Frank, and welcome. Gentlemen, I have in my hands here a headline that I'd like to read to you. This is a headline from the Guardian periodical. The Guardian, you may know, was a Pulitzer Prize winner. 2014 is when they won a Pulitzer Prize for some of the writings that they put out. The headline from one of their articles dated June 14th, 2015 says this: global cybercrime has infected the very soul of capitalism with evil. An excerpt from the article reads, the cost of cybercrime, bankers refuse to put a figure on it, but the amount currently being lost to cybercrime globally is certainly in excess of $100 billion a year. And it could be quadruple that, is what the article alludes to in one of the sentences here. $100 billion, my goodness. I'd love to reach out to Frank first. And Frank, we'd love your perspective on that headline and that information that the article considers. The author's name here is Paul Mason. Paul wrote about cybercrime costing approximately $100 billion globally, and it could be quadruple that because the banks don't necessarily report the breaches, which could have a negative impact on their image. Would you mind sharing your thoughts on that and what you're seeing in Europe?
Yeah, sure, Declan. I mean, first of all, I think that's probably a conservative estimate.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I mean, cybercrime is, within the UK alone, cybercrime costs the UK economy 27 billion sterling a year, which is close to 65 million US, I would say, a year in billion in the UK alone. And though cybercrime is clearly a significant issue, it's one that affects all industry sectors and businesses globally. Specifically within the UK, to illustrate, the internet economy is larger than the healthcare, construction and education sectors. And I think going back to the initial figures, they clearly go some way to empirically benchmark the risk on the UK economy. 27 billion a year is an absolutely staggering amount and represents a significant cost. And, it's always growing. I think if you take and add figures from other countries in Europe and the Americas, you can really start to visualize what a real issue cybercrime has become. I think as an industry sector, if we look at cybercrime, if we look at it as a business, it also represents a huge opportunity and a proven business model for criminal groups. And in fact, there's recent evidence to show that more traditional criminals with backgrounds in theft, burglary, robbery, for example, are now transitioning into cybercrime. And I think that's a really concerning fact because it's beginning to show that criminal groups or the individuals are recognizing the opportunities and the potential return on investment in undertaking cybercrime. If you add to the fact that from my professional experience, many businesses are still not prepared for the threat of cybercrime, then you can start to see what a real issue this is. A recent study of security incidents in 2014, for example, found that something as simple as a phishing email, over 80,000 incidents, 25% of individuals working at companies were likely to open that. And that can actually take less than 2 minutes for the email to open and catch its first victim.
I find that interesting. Sorry to interrupt, Frank, but I find that remarkable that still that high percentage of people, even today, are still not aware of how phishing emails come by way of their inbox, and they're still inclined to click on them. You must find that stat surprising yourself.
Yeah, well, exactly that. It's so rudimentary. It's so rudimentary that you would just think that most business owners, most employees, that this was really nailed down. 25% over 80,000 incidents. It shows a clear lack of education within whether it's a family office or family enterprise or even any firm, any industry sector. There's a lack of education and awareness of how these groups are targeting enterprises. And when simple attacks like this have such a high probability of success, it really is easy to see why cybercrime is a growing industry, and it still continues to hit figures like this.
Yeah, I want you to hold that thought. Yeah, please, Anwar. Exactly. I was just about to draw from your thoughts on it. Please do share.
Yeah, and I don't think it's so much that people are doing anything wrong. I think it's more the fact that the criminals are evolving, and most of us are not keeping up. Now, if we look at phishing emails in the past, they had poor spelling. They might reference things that was clearly from Nigeria or something that was completely out of bounds. We would not think much of them. However, these criminal groups, as Frank alluded to, they're becoming extremely organized. They're hiring specialists, whether it be in education, making sure the grammar is correct, checking that these emails are relevant to the specific individuals that are targeting, so that they have less chance of detecting that something's false.
When you just described that, Anwar, I got the mental image of a cyber criminal or a cyber criminal syndicate having their own marketing department, because you're talking about presentation and grammar and the way the phishing email looks. So that's that's what I started thinking about when you described that particular scenario of them going through all the motions of making the email or the cyber plan, as it were, attractive to the potential victim.
I think perhaps just to add slightly to what you said, they are full-blown organizations. They do have marketing. I mean, if we've seen anything from some of the types of attacks, they actually provide support numbers and support emails when they've been, for example, CryptoLocker, which hit a number of people, and CryptoLocker was where someone was infected. They encrypted all their data and then gave them a specific timeline to pay, say, $300 or $500 or pounds to get their information back. And then they provided support numbers for them to be able to contact if once they paid and the key that they provided, the decryption key, didn't work, then they provided support. So what is this showing is that they're actually a real organization. They treat it the same way. They have HR hiring practices, all these sort of things. They go through the same steps and procedures that a normal organization does. And this has been found out as they've deconstructed some of these crime syndicates.
So you must have read at some point in your life, or you will at some point in the future, pick up Sun Tzu's Art of War. And it sounds to me, based on what both you and Frank have been seeing so far, is while you are here to defend families, you also, in some ways, may have an interest. I wouldn't know if you would use as strong a word as the word respect, but you recognize what you're up against, and it's not it's not like you use the word, it's an organization. So there is a bit of healthy respect in going in, knowing that it is a professional level game that you're heading into.
Yes, they're prepared, they're organized, and they're motivated.
And a lot of the time, they've got the best human capital. They've got the people who are extremely talented. If looking at those figures, you say $100 billion. Think of that as any other industry. That's a big market, and the best in that industry are clearly going to be attracted to that. So they're not only competing with they've not only got the resources that Anwar discussed at their disposal, they've also got the best capital, human capital, to carry out these and execute these attacks.
They also have one extra.
Quite worrying.
Oh, please go ahead.
Sure, they have one extra thing that most of us also don't always come to surface, and that is they have time. Time to invest into one or two or three individuals for great return. And most people don't realize that they really have almost an unlimited amount of time.
I like to leverage your last statement about time, and we alluded to infrastructure a little bit in the previous comments that led up to this point. I'd like to quote a bit of information from the Complete Family Office Handbook. This is a book that's written by Dr. Kirby Rusbach, and I think both of you gentlemen know Kirby. Kirby was kind enough to spend some time to do an interview with me as well, and I find her to be a remarkable talent in this space. In quoting her from her book, The Complete Family Office Handbook, on page 230, she talks about technology. And I'm going to read an excerpt from this page, and I'd like to have both of you reflect on it and share your thoughts on what she writes here. I'll start. A family with an efficient, resilient family office infrastructure and a solid technology plan is a powerful force that sets the groundwork for multi-generational success. Now, as she talks about the solid technology plan, she says this: as you start your own family office assessment, here are some key operations and technology questions to consider. One of the questions she asks is technology supporting or detracting from the family office management? Another question is, what are current family office technology trends and where are we headed? A third question, what are the greatest security risks and concerns when it comes to operational oversight and management of your family office? Those are the three questions I wanted to ask back to you, and maybe I'll ask them again in succession and get you to reflect on them. So one of the first questions that I want you to share back your thoughts on is, what are the greatest security risks and concerns when it comes to operational oversight and management of the family office, as you've seen? And why don't we start with you?
Sure. I believe it's all about implementation of that technology. Quite often, when I've worked with a family office, they use technology that it's not often designed for. For example, Microsoft Word. It's an excellent technology to create reports for clients. However, some family offices also use Microsoft Word to store banking, client information, passwords, and other highly confidential, right? MS Word is not simply designed for security or to protect that info, and puts the family office and the clients at tremendous risk. So it really comes down to is not what technology, it's how you use it and the implementation thereof.
So you're saying that you've seen in cases where clients store their personal banking data within Microsoft applications, which, and you have to help me with the technical terminology here, but is that saved in the cloud somewhere, or is that saved somehow in a manner that could leave the family vulnerable through a breach,
yes.
Finding that information? Okay.
Yeah, I think number one is that they use the tool to store that information, because there's so much of this information. We got passwords, we got all these sort of things that we're trying to manage. Mm-hmm. And the tool that often we use is something what we're familiar with. And many of us use some sort of office program as a simple way. Oh, this is how I can write in or collect or contain all this information. Unfortunately, it's not really the right tool for it. And that's just one example.
So here's a wonderful spot in our conversation for us to maybe provide a deep bit of professional experience. So if you're saying that clients should not use those types of data storage processes for their personal information, can you share one thing that they could probably do as an alternative that will not create what I would describe as inefficiencies in their life, or just be more of a headache? What have you put into place, or what have you implemented if storing it on the actual software itself is not the wisest thing to do from a cybersecurity breach perspective? What have you recommended or suggested?
Sure. So one of the big things a lot of clients use those documents for is passwords. Passwords are something we use on a regular basis, and many of us have, tens, maybe hundreds or thousands, whatever they might be. So using a dedicated, specialized tool like a password management tool that allows you to collect those is usually a good way to start, at least.
Okay. Thank you for sharing that. Frank, I'd love to have your thoughts on it. I'll ask the question again. The question is this: what are the greatest security risks and concerns when it comes to operational oversight and management of family office information and data? What have you seen in your world that you've advised your clients on that you can share comfortably in this call? And what were some of your learnings? What did you find that was revelatory to you once you started your investigation?
I think the answer to that question, and it's a really good question, by the way, the answer to that question is always going to come down to, every family office or family enterprise is always going to be different, because you need to take into consideration that they're in different, they're different in their maturity. So how long have they been running? How many systems have they implemented? How well do they integrate? Have they been custom built? There's going to be things like how much information do they manage? So all of these different things are going to make up the risk environment for that family office. I think the main risks are clearly going to be security risk to their information. So they're confidential, they're business critical, and they're private, personal, identifiable information. How is that stored? And again, that could be like what Anwar stated. It could be a bank statement. It could be certain portfolio. It could be any sort of financial data. Also, you need to take in consideration that information won't always be at risk when it's within the family office. It's how it's communicated. Is it sent over email? How are you sending it out? How do you communicate with? If you've got an investment manager, then and some of the investment is outsourced to a different firm, how do you communicate? And how do you send instructions? And do you meet quarterly, 6 monthly in the office? And I think lastly, and the biggest of all, and this comes back to the original question with phishing emails, education and awareness, is the operational security risks to the family office. And by that I mean, how is the information classified? Who has access to this sort of information? It could be something as simple as who can have access to the server room. It could be, is there a security culture within that family office? Are people, if an employee takes home a memory stick with some bank statements or some financial data on it and they lose it on the train, for example, what they do they say they've lost it, or do they cover it up? And all of these sorts of different things will make up the risk profile of the family office. Certainly from what I've seen is it's raising awareness of where the risks come from. I think that you need to be aware of the information and classify it. So that will ultimately dictate how you store it, how you send it. Can a junior member of staff have access to certain information? Most definitely not. But who has access to certain things? I think reading and listening to your question from Dr. Ross Block, and she's gone a great way to actually overview the whole process of maturity and how you set that family office up. But the security risks are always different, and without working with somebody to identify the unique risks to each family office, you can't really start to manage them effectively. I guess the short answer is every family office is different and everyone needs a different solution.
Indeed, and I appreciate exactly where you're coming from. You used some terminology just now, and I was listening intently to what you were saying. I actually made a note of two bits of terminology that you mentioned as they're applicable to a family office environment. The first I wrote down was called, you used the term security culture, and I wanted to get your thoughts on that in one moment. Another one that I wrote down was called, you described it as the risk profile of the family office, but I'm used to seeing that in the context of an investment, but you're talking about here from a security and a cybercrime perspective. I wonder if you wouldn't mind sharing a bit more on what your thoughts are about the term security culture as it pertains to the family office environment. I'd love to have your perspective on that, because I find that to be an interesting point to understand a bit more about from your perspective.
Okay. I mean, I guess security culture comes down to the fact that everybody's on the same page. You know, there's a policy, for example, on phishing emails, what you should, what you shouldn't do. Perhaps a security advisor has come in, or you've had an outsourced provider come in and give you some training on what the risks are, how best to manage them. A security culture, when that's done successfully, is that everybody's on the lookout for the family and for the enterprise. And that comes down to how the receptionists deal with phone calls. Are they aware of social engineering? Is there a pre-rehearsed way on how you should handle something that doesn't quite fit right? If somebody comes into reception and or comes into a common area waiting to have a meeting, you know, are they challenged if they're in an area when they're not recognized? You know, it could be anything from the fact that everybody's on the same page and that security is taken seriously. And it doesn't have to be hard line at all. It's not saying, look, you know, drill it, you know, really drilled and rehearsed, but it's making sure that everybody understands where the risks present themselves, what the appropriate response would be, and just having everybody on board and aware of, look, you know, if you see someone you don't identify, who you don't recognize, you know, challenge them. If there's something you're not quite happy about, report it to somebody. And a security culture, you know, it could be, it pertains to a family office. It pertains to a family, you know, the staff that work at an estate for a private family. You know, it's just about instilling this awareness that where the risks are, what do we need to do as a team to prevent these risks from taking, or the threats from taking place.
Indeed, and
Can I add one thing to that?
Please go ahead, Anwar. Please.
Of course. Sure, and I think everything Frank says absolutely important. I think the one key thing is empowering the staff, really empowering the staff to take a stand in supporting the security culture, in that they are comfortable with stopping people. They're comfortable by saying, no, I can't share this with you, be it, you know, an advisor, an outside firm that the family office might be working with. I can't send it to you in email format. We have to do it via the secure method. So it's as much as embracing security within the firm, but also empowering each individual to support that security posture.
Thank you for that, Anwar. I think that's an important point. I mean, I've made some notes here on the topic, and Frank, I'll reflect back to you what I have written down because I found it to be quite helpful. I've written down, as part of the security culture conversation, you've got 3 call-outs, which were policy, training, and behavior. And I think Anwar's point about empowering the team talks about corporate culture, more so than the security culture, but a bigger strategic corporate culture to empower individuals on the team to, I think the term you used, Anna, was take a stand, to say no. And that's, I actually got the image of team members saying, no, I'm not in any way put off by saying no to you because I know I'm in the right here, and the reason I know I'm in the right is because we've talked about this internally, and I've been given the power to say no. I appreciate that. Thank you for sharing that, Anwar. Frank, you also mentioned the term risk profile of a family office. I love where you're going with that idea. I'd love to just understand a bit more from your perspective, and I'm sure, Anwar, you've got some thoughts on this as well. So. Risk profile of a family office. We're not talking about, you know, time horizons or in equity bands here, or, you know, option strategies or hedge strategies or anything like that. We're not even talking about different types of investments. We're talking security. We're talking cybersecurity from a risk profile of a family office perspective. Do share some of your thoughts on what that risk profile of a family office looks like, and what you've seen, and how we can learn from what you've seen.
Okay, yeah, sure. I mean, and every risk profile of, you know, it doesn't matter if it's the family office or a high net worth family. Much like how, as a family office, how they're often described as the, you know, the hub of a wheel is the family, and the various spokes coming away from the family being one area of expertise that's looked after by the family office. It could be tax, or for example, lifestyle management. There's all of these various disciplines, and security has the same disciplines within our industry. Only we'd be looking, for example, when you look at the family office, where can these risks present themselves? Firstly would be information. I covered that. I think that, clearly that's what we're here talking about today. Another would be communication risk, the operational security risks, more so with the birth of social media and the way that we are conducting our business and personal lives online. You're looking now at reputation management and reputation risk. There's privacy to consider. So when I talk about the risk profile or travel risks when the family go away, for example, so when I look at the risk profile of the family office, saying that their state of maturity, what functions they offer, what are they catering for the family, that will impact where risks base that family office. How do they communicate the information, for example? Be different for everyone. Going back to the Word document, some a very well resourced and well thought out family office might have invested heavily in their own bespoke systems in order to run the business. That's going to have its own risks. For example, you may have some sort of portal that needs to be accessed from anywhere in the world to be able to review certain information. That's going to have different risks from a smaller family office. That is
Frank,
managing.
Do you mind if I interrupt a quick second? You said the word portal. From your life experience and your professional experience, have you found that, and this is something that we're discussing right now in our world, have you found that portals increase the safety and security of communication amongst family members and their advisors within private portals?
Yeah, of course it will. It needs to be managed right, is the short answer. There's lots to consider. From the, if you looked at that project from the ground up, for example, who designs or codes that system? Where is it hosted? Who manages that? Who has access to it? Who uploads the information? There's lots of different working parts, and with something like that, it would make perfect sense to have a cybersecurity advisor from the very beginning, sort of saying, look, this is what we'd really love to achieve. This is what we're thinking. This is who we think should code the website. This is how we think we're going to upload it. What's outsourced? What's in-house?
Okay.
But yes, of course, it's not. So when we talk about risk profile, these sorts of elements with technology are going to, that standalone portal, if you might need to do some sort of web application penetration test twice a year, or you might need to audit. You'd need to audit if it was outsourced. How are they going to treat the family's information? So yeah, any sort of technology project like that can put the family office at risk, can put information at risk. It's how you choose to manage it, how you choose to structure that project, and how you choose to ultimately host it and make the right decisions. But yeah, with the right advice, it can be an asset.
You just taught me some new terminology, and I wrote it down again. Web penetration test. Wow. Okay. Sounds fascinating. And what are your thoughts?
Yeah,
sorry, but go ahead. Sorry, Frank. Maybe you haven't finished your thought.
No, I finished. I mean, there's just so many different elements with each project and how each enterprise uses technology. So each profile is very much different.
Yeah. And what are your thoughts, if you'd like to comment on that point about the risk profile of a family office and what you've seen and what you've learned?
Sure. The risk profile of a family office, Frank covered a lot of great stuff, so I don't want to repeat any of that. But what I'd like to state is really reiterated. Really depends on the maturity and the size of the family office, and that the larger the family office, they have different risks. The smaller family office obviously outsource a lot of that information, and they represent quite a bit different type of risk. I think also one thing that people often don't consider is a family office is also at risk. The risk profile is extended to the families they serve. So if a family themselves is very is not well informed around the risks, and they're very they share information or they expose themselves, they, by just simply being connected to the family office, expose the family office. And in the case of, say, a multifamily office, they expose all the other clients as well.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a good
And
point.
I think that's a very good point. And the reason I responded the way that I did is this is as much as I've spoken to both of you on different occasions about this, I still continue to learn so much and recognize how deep we still need to go to prepare an appropriate offensive action plan, as it were, because something you just said there, Anwar, about multifamily offices, it made me think, well, should multifamily offices even really be advertising their services on the web and in media, essentially saying to the unsavory elements in our environment, come hither, we're open for business, and you may have something to gain from our business. That's an interesting thought. But thank you for sharing it in the way that you did. Anwar, I wanted to ask this question to you. It's from Dr. Russ Block's questions, the three that I mentioned earlier. Maybe you can comment on this. The question is, what are current family office technology trends, and where do you think we're headed with them? Maybe with you working with celebrities and executives and other family offices around the globe. I know you've just come back from the U.S. You were speaking in the U.S. on a few engagements. What are you seeing to be the family office technology trends that were of concern, or things that you saw that were remarkable and worth mentioning because they're positive changes?
Okay, so perhaps the number one thing that the trend is that family offices are slowly beginning to realize these cyber risks are real. When I, years back when I used to talk to them, they always thought, it's not real. This is something, And I think the second thing is that they're also coming to understand that the cyber risk goes beyond technology and it really is a business risk issue.
Yes.
And that's, I think those are really critical. And so then it's slowly moving away from just one of the technology-related projects to a real business risk, so something that we actually have to look at, not later, but now.
Interesting. You mentioned business risk, and I'm comfortable with the terminology, but also something else I've learned from you in complement to, let's call it a business plan, you gentlemen have a term. It's called a cybersecurity plan. That I found useful as well. I found that interesting to learn about. Frank, how is Virtus Risk Management helping with developing efficient cybersecurity plans? And maybe after you're finished sharing, Anwar, maybe you can comment on what you're doing in your world to help your clients with designing and implementing efficient cybersecurity plans. Frank?
Yeah, sure. I think the way you need to approach it firstly is that you need to have an understanding of the business and what technology they're using. There's got to be a discovery phase. When we're retained or when we first work with an organization, there's going to be a lot of consultancy where we're just trying to understand how the business is put together. And from that point forward, you can start to offer a really good security assessment, because you need to understand what their current security posture is. How well protected are they from a technology standpoint? How well protected are they from, their physical building? What level of education have the staff got? And have they got adequate policies and procedures in place? It really would come down to a three-phased risk assessment before we started putting any planning in place. You're going to, firstly, we would like to conduct a penetration test, if you like. And that's going to provide a view of the threats faced by the family office from the outsider. So in sort of other words, we would assume the role of a cyber criminal or a hacker trying to penetrate your IT defenses. And that's going to show the family office or the enterprise where any risks would present themselves. Secondly, you would look to do a vulnerability assessment, which is going to assess the weaknesses from inside the network. It would include things like network vulnerabilities to disgruntled employees, employee malice, for example, or just carelessness. And then we'd look, that would include things like doing a security assessment of the building. How is the access control in place? Is there adequate CCTV? Is the server locked away? And from that point forward, then you can get to understand where their current security culture and how the staff are working within that organization. And we would assess that by selecting a handful of employees and just asking them some basic questions. And just making sure that, are they aware of the risks of cybercrime? Do they know what a phishing email is? Using a previous example, if they were to lose a memory stick containing confidential information, would they report it? If yes, who would they report it to? I think by doing that sort of assessment for the organization, you can benchmark where they're at currently. And then from that point forward, start to put in place some best practices and a security plan that's congruent with their current level of risk.
Mm-hmm. So I've gotten a three-phase security plan approach, and for the notes that I'm taking as I'm listening intently to what you're saying, I have one is a penetration test, which is generally, or actually, let me just rephrase that. That's specifically for the outside. Then there's a vulnerability assessment, which is for the inside, and there's a third thing that you said that I may have missed in the three-phase.
The third part would be their current approach to security within the organization. Is going to look at policy procedures. Are they adequate? What's the current level of training with staff? It's going to be probably the most important. It's their philosophy to security. And if you look at a lot of the way that things are cyber criminals act, it's not always the technology that you need to be concerned about. The biggest threat will come from inside the organization mostly.
Indeed, the human risk, as it were, the behavioral risk.
Indeed, yes.
So in phase 3, the current state assessment, maybe here you can comment on the last question that I wanted to get your feedback on in Anwar's from Dr. Russ Blockett. Is technology that you've seen in the family office environments, are you seeing that the technology is supporting or detracting from the family office management? And I'm sure you could probably give us a perspective after you've done a few of these risk assessments with families or with enterprises. In phase 1, you would take a look at the penetration test for the outside, vulnerability assessment from the inside, and of course the current state assessment and the third step of the three-phase process. Are you finding that in that risk assessment that you're seeing technology is supporting or detracting from family office management, generally speaking?
Both is
interesting.
The correct answer. Not everybody's got it right, and not everybody's got it wrong. In many cases, like I said before, if there's been due thought and due care into how they build these systems, and they've got the right advice, it can ultimately support how they operate as a business, and also, it can be secure. Contrary to that, if you've got legacy systems that don't integrate, that aren't well managed, that people aren't sure where risks would present themselves, then of course that's going to detract. So I think it really comes down to, what's their appetite for risk. Anwar stated earlier that he's seen that, and I would agree with him, that there's a trend now that family offices, financial institutions are starting to take cybersecurity more seriously. I think that's probably down to compliance and the fact that they don't want to be seen to have the negative consequences. But certainly now people are seeking the right advice to say, look, can you do a review of our organization? We're using multi-factor, we're using Salesforce, for example. Our client database is in the cloud. They hadn't really considered that, for example, or they're using certain marketing applications, or they're using people are looking for the right advice now to say, look, this is how we're set up in this department or within the organization as a whole. What do we need to know? Are we in good shape? And the answer is always different. I know that's probably not what you want to hear, Declan, but in my experience, that's the truth.
It's a candid answer, and I appreciate those best when they're pretty clear and not sugar coated. I like taking it straight. So thank you for being that direct with it. Anwar, I'd love to have your straight answer on the same question that we talked about with Frank just now. I'll read the question back to give you a moment to reflect on it. The question was, is technology that you're seeing in the family office environment supporting or detracting from the family office operations and management, from the families that you've worked with and the people that or enterprises as well that you've spent some time with? What are you thinking? What are you seeing? And what would be your reflection on what you've seen?
Well, I will go with a lot of what Frank says, in that that I think really comes down to how they use the technology. There is no right and wrong way necessarily. It's really the implementation. And kind of going back to my original or my earlier response in the way of MS Word, how they were using it. Technology can help support the business, allow them to interact with their clients and do business quickly and efficiently, provide their clients with the appropriate information in a timely manner. However, it has a huge risk exposure if they don't use it well or use it in a way that is where they're sharing or giving away or not securely using that information or that technology. So I really think it's about how they implement the technology, whether they've had the appropriate mindset, and kind of goes back to what Frank said about culture, security culture, is that are we involving security from the onset, or is it just something like a patchwork where we're trying to apply it afterwards? It's much easier to build a dam nice and securely with no holes than to try and patch it after the dam is full of water and then put in some twigs and some bark and something like that and try and patch it afterwards. So I really believe that it's really about the culture, the mindset, and the implementation.
Thank you, Anwar, for saying that. I'd like to leverage your thoughts to just transition into another excerpt from a book that I think we all have in our own professional libraries. This one is called Wealth Exposed. Wealth Exposed. It's written by a fellow by the name of Brian G. Flood, and I think both of you had or may have had a chance to meet Brian. I've met him. He's a delightful fellow.
Yes.
I consider him a true professional. And I'll read from his book here on page 78. Here's what Brian writes in his book Wealth Exposed. He writes in a section entitled "Whom Are We Really Dealing With Here?" It says, unfortunately, wealth attracts unwanted attention from unsavory characters, bent on utilizing any available method to redistribute it in their favor. No, he says jokingly, I'm not talking about politicians, although one can easily make the case to include them in that category, he says in jest. And contrary to conventional wisdom, the two-bit criminal doesn't target the rich, preferring instead the low-hanging fruit of the more vulnerable, such as the elderly and the mom-and-pop shop, and just about any unsuspecting person with cash in his or her wallet. Rather, he goes on, the wealthy are high-value targets for the more sophisticated criminal elements with access to technology and highly skilled specialists. And I'll round out his quote by saying this. He says, utilizing advanced techniques once thought to be the exclusive domain of the FBI, these 21st century criminals, typically backed by a U.S.-based or international crime syndicate, conduct extensive surveillance, searching the depths of cyberspace for information. They will even penetrate their mark's inner circle. That was that point was stirring to me. They will even penetrate their mark's inner circle before launching their assault in the form of a home invasion, extortion, cyber attack, identity theft, or fraud. Now, if hearing that and me just reading it doesn't give you some form of a reaction, then we'd have to search for a pulse, because any family who's achieved some level of meaningful success recognizes what that actually means, and we've touched on it earlier on this call. And Brian's words ring true, and it hit me straight in the heart and concerned my mind. Frank, if you're open to sharing on this call, and I'd want you to, of course, respect your relationships and your confidentiality agreements with your clients, but in general terms, can you share at a high level the types of attacks you've seen on some of your clients? And I'd like you to share a little bit more about how Virtus Risk Management helped those. So share with us the types of attacks you've seen, maybe 2 or 3, and what you did at Virtus Risk Management to help them.
Yeah, sure, Declan. I mean, first of all, I think that the sentiment of what you read is absolutely spot on. The high net worth demographic, high net worth individuals certainly attract sophisticated criminal groups that specifically target that demographic because they're looking for a maximum return on their investment. And unfortunately, high net worth individuals represent minimum risk. The cyber criminals that are going to be targeting my clients are going to be exploiting each piece of available information that they can use to successfully execute a cyber attack. Going with a case study, I think to illustrate how professional these groups are, a common or on trend at the moment, certainly a scenario that I've witnessed within several industries, is what we call in the UK ghosting. Now, essentially, the cyber criminals will put in an awful amount of information gathering on a potential target before they've even selected the right candidate, because obviously they're looking for maximum return on investment. And what I said earlier, how much time they have, that they will spend a significant amount of time finding the right candidate, and then they're going to research them and find any way in that they can. And essentially, ghosting, what it will do is they will breach the email client that's used by the individual with some sort of Trojan or some sort of way to get access to those systems with a carefully crafted email. And what they will do is, rather than act immediately, is that they will monitor how that individual communicates with everybody within their business circle. So, for example, how do they communicate with an outsourced investment manager? How do they communicate with the CFO? How do they speak with their spouse or a business partner? And they're looking to try and find out how you use language, how these conversations take place on each side, and they can watch for 8 weeks, anywhere to 6 months, until they're happy, and then they will emulate. So, say for example you've been compromised, Declan, they'll look at how you're having conversations with people within your network until they know how you write and craft your emails, and then they'll send a very, very simple email from your email account to, for example, your chief financial officer, saying, "Hey, listen, I've got a fastball. I need to transfer some money to XYZ account in Cayman. Can you make sure this is done with a sense of urgency? Very many thanks." Or however you would sign something like that out quickly.
Gives me chills just thinking about what you're saying. Yeah.
But you can go to see just how organized they are. They're not looking for a quick buck. They're waiting for the right opportune moment. They'll know what is a routine wire transfer for you? Is it $40,000? Is it $150,000? They're going to learn all of these sorts of intricacies about how you do business, and that's very specific to you. And unfortunately, some people, they wire the money straight out, and the attacks have been very successful. So I think that's one case study that we've seen that's common at the moment. It's certainly
Can
on
you call
trend.
that, if I can get the name correctly, help me if I'm pronouncing it correctly. It's called ghosting, as in ghost, but ghosting.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's what we would call it within the UK. I don't know what Anwar, how do you know that? What would you call that?
I think that's just a manipulation or what do you call it? Impersonation. That's impersonation attack.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, I think that sadly, wealth and crime are intrinsically linked. They're looking for the low-hanging fruit. If we've already established that it's a billion-dollar industry, that 25% of employees will open a phishing email. If you can look at people who you can target that are custodians of large sums of money, it makes sense to target those. It makes good business sense. So in terms of how you can prevent against that, I mean, sadly, you might be breached and you won't know about it until post-event.
Aren't there software applications that run scans to make sure that your operating systems or your applications aren't bugged, to use one of your industry terms? There are software applications that do that, right?
Yeah, there are, but unfortunately, those software companies
they're largely
are
ineffective.
They're always behind the curve. They're always behind the curve. They're always playing catch up. Cybercriminal 1 creates a way to exploit a vulnerability in a newly released piece of software. This software company now diligently go to work to fix that vulnerability and tell everyone that the patch is in place and it's safe. But guess what? Cybercriminal 2 has already found that we're always behind the curve. You can't rely on those sorts of technologies to protect you adequately.
Okay. Well, not what I wanted to hear, but okay.
But this is where knowing what to open, knowing how these attacks take place, that's how you're going to best protect yourself, through education and awareness.
So maybe that's a good point. Yeah, let's talk about that. I know you've got an interesting perspective from the case study, and thank you for that. But I want to now draw from you some of the silver linings, if you will, the upside, the positive sunshine conversation about what have you done to help and how has it worked?
How does it work? Well, first thing you need to do is undertake a full assessment and a cyber investigation to find out how you were breached. Sadly, it's going to have an impact on your business. These things are going to take time to put right.
Yes.
Our main objective is to get your business up and running as quickly as possible with minimum impact. How do you put it right? Find out how it happened. Try and understand where you're vulnerable. Look and do a full security assessment of your cybersecurity system. If there's any vulnerabilities there, put them in place. Let's say it came from an employee or it came from how you use a computer. Let's make sure you're aware. There's no quick fix. If you could, here's the thing: if you want to prevent this and get the warm and fuzzy feeling that this isn't going to happen, then I think it comes down to being proactive and preventative and thinking, right, yeah, okay, I recognize this is a real risk, and I want to check, am I in good shape now? And, that's the sort of client, I think that Anwar will agree, that's the sort of client that we want to work with. Somebody who's taking responsibility for their own cybersecurity, that recognizes that this risk is real, and they want to, think of it as insurance, and they want to make sure they're in a good position. Sadly, when you've been breached like that, we need to find out how it happened, and then you're always playing catch up,
on that, on that point, on that point, Frank, of how it happened. Sorry to interrupt with this question, but I think I'd like to throw to Anwar on his perspective. Anwar, you and I were talking about there being a significant behavioral management piece in what you do. Aside from the technical assessment, there's also some human risk management and human risk behaviors that you have to manage tactfully in your role. You told us once upon a time in a previous conversation about a breach that occurred, and as the investigation ensued, you found that maybe not you, but from the situation that you were recounting back to us, it was found that the breach occurred on the executive's laptop, and I think during the conversation, one of us talked about who do we point the finger at, and you piped up and said, what, it's not about pointing the finger, because we still have to remember that we're dealing with people here, and these things will happen. I'd love to have your comments on that, if you'd like to share a little bit more about that circumstance and how you managed it and what you learned from that.
Sure, yeah. In an organization, there's always personalities, egos, and feelings, and that's the bottom line. We have to understand that anything that happens is impacting people as much as it is impacting reputations and finances. So the important thing is, in that particular scenario we spoke about, maybe briefly, it was the senior executive's laptop was breached. As a result, the criminal used what Frank had brought up in terms of ghosting or impersonation, able to understand how the organization and everyone within the organization actually operated. Because in this case, everyone became breached after the executive was breached, because the executive was seen to have sent, much like what Frank said, using the exact nuances, and they sent that same sort of message to all staff. And then before they knew it, the entire organization was under the complete surveillance of the criminal organization or the criminal group. So going back to your response or your question, how do we figure this out? After we kind of diagnosed the issue, found out the source and that sort of thing, and the question is, how do we approach it? And my approach is not to blame, because that doesn't solve, that doesn't serve, that doesn't help. But what we need to look at is, okay, now that we've identified the issue, how can we help? How can we empower? How can we go forward? And that is critical from the human perspective of tackling a breach. And aside from all the technical nuances that we've covered in this presentation or this discussion, and that Frank has shared very eloquently.
Indeed. And I think one of the key things that I believe I asked you at one point in our conversations, if I can quote you on this is something that you shared, Anwar, with me. It's a statement you made that struck me as concerning, and it was this. You said, one successful attack means that the probability of repeat increases 100%. And you went on to say that you believe that the probability of ultra-high net worth families and their advisors being attacked over the next 5 years is close to 100%. And I couldn't help but shake my head and nod in concern to that statement. And I know that both of your firms undertake digital privacy assessments. Earlier on, we called them risk assessments. And we talked a bit about the process. And Anwar, you've got a similar process that you follow along in your firm at Visram Security. As we look to providing some tangible steps for the listeners and the folks, the families and the advisors listening to this conversation, there's some key questions that I know that you ask some of your clients, and if you're comfortable now, why don't we do that? Why don't you share with us some of the questions that you ask? And I know one of the questions is, have you ever had a cybersecurity assessment undertaken at your family office, business, or residential address? And you go on to ask, well, how long ago was that? You've got a few more questions to ask. Do you mind sharing a bit more of those types of questions so that the listeners can start asking them of themselves?
Sure. A lot of these questions really align with same things that your financial advisor might ask you or anything. And that is simply, like you said, we start off, have you ever had an assessment? What we ask the clients to really rate the likelihood of a breach occurring. We start with, have you ever had an assessment? Have you ever been breached? What's the likelihood? What do you believe the likelihood of a breach occurring? How would you rate that breach likelihood or the impact of that versus, say, a staff going rogue and stealing your information? Like, how would you compare that to an impact of a fire? The reason why we try and draw those questions is really help to understand the culture and what we talked about, the culture and the thought process within the organization to see how they consider what is the cybersecurity risk as it pertains to real life. Because when we think about cybersecurity, we often think it's something digital. It's something that we can't see or touch or feel. It doesn't feel real. But if we can get an understanding of how its appearance or how it feels relative to other things that they're much more familiar with, we can get a better understanding of how they approach it and build a more customized approach, a customized plan for that particular environment.
Okay, thank you for that. I know you've got some other questions here, like, do you have a comprehensive information security policy?
Yes.
What are your backup schedules? What's your social media usage? You have something here, BOYD. I think it's an acronym.
Bring your own device. Yeah.
Bring your own device.
Bring your own device. Yeah.
And you ask questions like, who is currently responsible for your information security? Who are they supposed to be audited by? Which is a key question because you go a step further, having a security person, but who's auditing that security person? Is that in-house or outsourced? Another powerful question you ask is, do you encrypt sensitive data in transit, or do you send sensitive information over email? And have you trained your staff on cybersecurity, on social media risk and awareness training? Have you had any awareness training on cybersecurity? So all powerful questions to ask here. Now, as we look to addressing the last two areas in our that I wanted to talk to both of you about while we're on the phone together and while we're still having this conversation, how do we know, from a client precautionary perspective, how do we know who the good guys are in this cybersecurity business? I mean, it behooves me to ask, after everything we've talked about and how organized these cyber criminals are and how well funded they are, how do we know? There must be ways to tell the genuine article, the real McCoy, as it were. How do you know when you're working with the good guys in the cybersecurity business? And I'll leave that question open to both of you before we head into closing up the call, and we'll wrap up with one last item. But how do we know who the good guys are in the cybersecurity business?
I think it begins with building trust. You have to build trust with the client, and that really entails sitting down with the family or the family office and explaining what we do, how we do it, and perhaps most important, teaching them how to protect themselves. Because at the end of the day, if they don't take responsibility of protecting themselves, there's no technology, person, or business that can protect them. So I think really the key is helping and empowering the family office or the family in understanding what the risks are and showing them what they can do themselves, because certainly they trust themselves to be able to do whatever they are doing in a safer and more secure fashion.
I appreciate what you're saying in the question, in the response, but and I respect what you're saying. My thought, however, is we've just been discussing earlier in the call that sometimes maybe the client is the reason for the breach, right? So that has an interesting implication as I see it from a logical decision-making perspective, because sometimes
right.
Even if you trust yourself and you think you're not going to, you inadvertently do it because of behavioral risk that you don't even know you have. You're not even aware of your own behavioral risk. So that's interesting. Thank you for sharing that, Anwar.
And maybe just...
go ahead, please, Anwar. Yeah.
Yeah, no, and I think our reactions are based on our experience and knowledge.
Yeah.
If we gain new experience and new knowledge, we change our behaviors.
Indeed.
So I think that would perhaps not necessarily eliminate, but at least reduce the likelihood of self infection, if you will.
Yeah, we use a word when we're talking to clients and families. We find ways to mitigate risk, and I hear exactly what you're saying. Frank, your thoughts? How do we identify the good guys in the cybersecurity business, and what would you say clients should be on the lookout for?
I think it's a really good question. It's the $1 million question, isn't it? I mean, how do you select an investment manager? How do you select any vendor? I think firstly, you via recommendation through the reputation of the firm. And once you've maybe got a short list, then you've got to do your own due diligence. Any reputable firm or freelance consultant, they're going to welcome any kind of scrutiny or due diligence on them. They're going to be completely transparent. Feel free to ask any difficult questions. If you find that you don't know what those answers are, which is what the right questions are to be asked, I guess you've got to sit down and get a flavour for each individual. I think you'll know who. Probably most importantly is who's used to working within this sector, who is used to working with a high net worth individual. How they're different is there's multiple residencies. There's there's a lot of high value assets that need to be looked after. You've got to look after the human assets. You've got to look after the financial assets of the family and the enterprise. I think you're going to need to find somebody who specializes within that niche. I think you've got to ask them the right questions. If you don't know the right questions to ask, then maybe ask somebody that you trust, another advisor. I think many times we're referred in through other professional advisors, and I think that our circle that we operate in is very small. I think that that's often how we get recommended in, is through working within that circle, that small trusted group of advisors. But I don't think I'm not saying you can't shop for that on the internet, but I think that you've got to have a clear goal of what you need to get out of it, where you want to be, what is the end result, and then set about it as how you would choose. If you wanted to put 10 million into a fund in any commodity or with any investment manager, what process will you follow? What is the recruitment policy, the recruitment process? And I think that you've got to take that stance as well with selecting the right firm. Obviously, there's qualifications that you're going to want to see. Have they got an academic background in this? Have they got a background within the security industry? They're the sorts of things you need to know. But it's a good question, Declan. I don't know. I think that.
Yeah, I appreciate you taking the time and the effort to respond, because part of the reason I ask these questions is, we're asking those questions, and of course, as a family office who cares for other families as intimately as we do, we have to be on the leading edge of thought leadership, right? So while we do come across professionals who are highly accredited PhD level candidates and they've got some stellar CVs, we still always have to ask the question, right? There's a reputational risk that we have to be aware of. And I say this, I'll speak I'll share back a personal experience so both of you can appreciate that indeed I am also personally as well as professionally connected to this conversation, and seeing that we learn some more as maybe in future conversations. Hopefully we can have you both back at a certain time in the future to talk a bit more about what you're seeing and learning. But we do some work here with a private real estate firm in Toronto, and they hired on a new investor relations manager And I'd met with this person, spent some time with her, and she's a delightful person. I got to know her personality and understand the way she communicates and speaks, and knew her mannerisms relatively well after a couple meetings, after being to a few investor meetings and private events that they held. And one day I received an email from this company, and I looked at the text. I saw the email address, and it was from the investor relations manager that I knew, but the text in the email was in no way like the way she communicates that I've seen in previous emails, or even in how she speaks in person. So I didn't reply to the email at all, and because the red flags went up. So I thought to myself, okay, this could be a phishing email. Either they got hacked, or maybe something else is happening. So what I did is I replied back to the fellow that I knew that was one of the partners of the firm, and I said, this email is not from this person, X person. This is something that I'm concerned about. You may want to look into your system and investigate whether or not there's been a security breach. His reply was that it's great that you caught that. You're absolutely right. She didn't write this, but one of her admin staff was using her account to send out an email. And that small scenario in itself spoke volumes to me and connects to so many things that you've both shared on this call, is that even though you have an investor relations manager, you still have admin staff that have connections or access to their desktop, and that talks to who has access to what information and who's authorized to do what. When we talked about the policies earlier, so if families and their advisors aren't paying attention, as it were, and aren't intuitive enough to clue into these, what I would describe as random but still impactful issues that show up. And if they're not diligent to be aware that something like this can happen, they could have responded to that email like someone in my group could have, thinking it was from the investor relations manager, and provided information that we didn't want to share back to a party that wasn't qualified to receive it or authorized to receive it. So anyways, all that to say is that I'm there with you. I understand when you describe ghosting, how it could affect us. I've had those internal experiences. So and privacy is top of mind for any family who has been blessed with some good fortune in their family life, or from previous generations and into the second or third. Privacy is top of mind, and with that privacy topic top of mind, I recall seeing in a Forbes article, the author's name Adam Tanner. This was written, I think, back in July of 2014. The title of his article talked about privacy fears, and it says, a startup sees Iceland as the best route to chill privacy fears. When it comes to families, and I know maybe this is not spoken of openly, but I'll share it with you both in this conversation, we're thinking about jurisdictions where we can host our data, that it will be protected and it will be private. And maybe as we look to close up this call, maybe I can draw from both your perspectives on jurisdictions that you've seen or that you've worked with at a high level, and what you're seeing about privacy concerns with the families that you're dealing with, and what options they're looking at to move some of their data into jurisdictions that have more appropriate privacy laws to protect themselves. Maybe we'll start. Go ahead, please, Frank.
Yeah, I was getting. I think it's only natural for everyone to be concerned about how their personal data is going to be used or even monitored now. Government legislation in both the United States and the United Kingdom is clearly raising awareness on these types of services, and I think it's only a matter of time before people move their servers or their browsing capability to more privacy-friendly jurisdictions. I don't think it's anything new. I think that if you look at how high net worth individuals live their lives and how they structure themselves, it's very much a global lifestyle. If you're looking at the most tax efficient jurisdiction for residency status, or the most tax efficient jurisdiction for your corporate headquarters, where you're domiciled, I think it's only natural that these same individuals are going to begin to seek out another jurisdiction or another flag in which to base their digital infrastructure. I think these concerns that we're seeing now, that there's several articles coming out choosing Iceland as an ideal jurisdiction, also Switzerland, because they've got such robust privacy laws. I think it's only the beginning. I've advised an international family on actually moving and relocating their server and their information infrastructure to a more suitable jurisdiction for these very reasons. And as more people consider the implications on their right to privacy, I think this is only going to become a more popular choice, Declan.
Mm-hmm. I agree. Thank you for sharing that real-world experience that you've actually had the opportunity to help facilitate a conversation with a family who was seriously considering doing something like this and has had the foresight to act on it now. And are you having those high-level conversations with any of your families or enterprises at the moment, or has it come up, or have you positioned in your mind yet that this is something that you should be talking to your clients about in the near future or just recent past?
Yes, I think this is an extremely topical conversation, and that we all have to consider what quote-unquote Big Brother, because it's governments around the world that are doing these type of what you often call big data or monitoring. I think a lot of considerations we have to understand is what is the purpose? What are we actually really trying to protect against? Some of these solutions offer where it's a great place to store because the governments have highly supportive privacy laws, and they're not really impeding on public services or private services that host data. I think also the other thing to consider is how we access them and making sure that the way that we access them are doing through very secure methods, using specific portals, whether it be virtual private networks, VPNs, or other such things. So these are definitely highly topical, something that's coming up more and more, and we're working with our clients to make sure we find the appropriate solutions.
If it's all the same to you both, I would love, since you've got such a strong interest in this and it's such an important topic of conversation to address, I'd love to have you both back at some point in the near future to talk about, privacy and jurisdictions that families are looking at to move some of their data to, as well as maybe look at some more of the technical aspects of the conversation to encrypt some of the data that they may not be getting from their current IT advisors, because the IT advisors are maybe focused on other aspects like hardware, software installs, and not focused with the scope on the security aspect, which is what your respective teams bring to the table as a cybersecurity specialist, which, from what I'm drawn from this conversation thus far, maybe it's something that I've started to think about deeply, is how we include a cybersecurity a person that we trust and have vetted onto the team to make those instructive decisions around cybersecurity and the technology aspect of the family office business. And with that, gentlemen, I wanted to say thank you both very, very much for taking the time to talk with us today. I think you've provided a significant amount of value and some insight drawn from your professional experiences. And if your timing, if the calendars sync and line up and good fortune prevails, perhaps we'll get together again in the coming months to talk about the privacy in other jurisdictions and so on. And I'll leave the call open for any final words from both of you, and we'll wrap up. Any other final parting thoughts that you'd like to share before we wrap up, Anwar?
Sure. Thank you, Frank, Declan, and all distinguished guests. I'd just like to say that cybercrime really impacts all businesses and all citizens. High net worth families are particularly at risk because, and their trusted advisors, because of the fact that there's such a high return on investment for the same amount of effort. And perhaps end with a metaphor. I believe that most of us are metaphorically walking around with our underwear around our ankles completely exposed. And the criminals are like the sun, and they're turning up the heat. What I hope that comes from this presentation is that we've provided you with some sunscreen to protect those very exposed areas and perhaps some information to really go deeper and help to learn more about what you need to do in your environments.
Great analogy, Anwar. I appreciate you sharing that. You also had another great analogy about how clients react after you've done your risk assessment, your risk profile assessment, or your privacy assessment, which actually both Frank and I find quite amusing. You know, I don't mind giving you an extra 30 seconds on the call
Sure.
call here to share how clients react in one of two ways after you presented them with your findings. So please, after you.
Okay, so I typically, when I work with clients, they react in one of two ways. They either react as a gopher or an ostrich.
Okay.
Ostrich, right? Ostrich is typically, the client who says, okay, I see that there's a threat coming, that wolf or whatever, but let me just put my head in the ground, but yet my entire body's exposed. Or they're the gopher, which are just always looking over the horizon, seeing what's wrong, what's the threat, what's the threat, what's the threat, what's the threat, and what do I need to do to run away or mitigate it.
Yeah, very neat. Thank you for sharing that. I appreciate it. Frank, as we turn to you for final words on the call, any last thoughts before we wrap up the call that you'd like to share with the families and the advisors listening? And we'll give you a few minutes to share your thoughts.
Yeah. Firstly, I'd like to go back to one of your previous questions about how do you know who the good guys are? And
sure, please.
Listening to you talk and as you progressed with your case study, I would say this. Once you've got the right advisor on board, they're going to be unbiased. They're going to be objective. You won't have that issue again. If you've got a really good security advisor, they're going to help you benchmark your costs. They're going to help you select and screen your employees to make sure, are there any red flags in their background? You're really going to be able to bounce ideas off of them to ensure that the family office or your family in general is secure. You want to go on holiday to Mexico. Are there any risks? It's worth putting the time and effort into selecting the right advisor and having him as a trusted advisor to put any, cyber or any kind of risk problem to them and get the right advice. I'd like to finish up by just saying thank you very much, Anwar. Thank you for the opportunity, Declan. I think having the opportunity to raise the awareness of where the risks are, what we could be doing to help minimize these risks, and to just educate our audience on some key issues. I hope they can take something away from it. I think that more needs to be done. I think that, going to Anwar and the gopher, if we've done anything, I really hope that we've made people take note of where these risks may present themselves. And I hope that you've thought of your own organization and or your own enterprise, and we've given you something to think about and some key takeaways. So thank you very much, Declan. Thank you, Anwar. It's great to be a part of this
You're very welcome. And as I've mentioned, Frank, we'll look to do a follow-up call, maybe part 2 of this series, because I think there is some significant value still to be had on this topic. As we wind up, Frank, why don't you leave your website address and any other details of future speaking engagements that you may have upcoming, so that the listeners and the families and their advisors can contact you and perhaps reach you at a future speaking engagement if you do have those booked already.
Yeah, sure. I mean, you can get in contact with me via the website, which is www.virtusriskmanagement.com, or better yet, through my personal email, which is frank.mori@virtusriskmanagement. I haven't got any up-and-coming speaking engagements at the moment, unfortunately, but you can follow us on Twitter. We're always sharing our ideas and our thoughts on high net worth individuals and family offices, and our thoughts on security over at Virtus RM. So yeah, I'm open to connect. If anyone's got any questions and wants to follow up, I'd be really, really happy to hear from them.
Oh, that's brilliant. Thank you for sharing that. I know you were recently involved in a family office engagement in the recent past as well, right?
Yeah, I've done several this year, but nothing now.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect.
Yeah.
Anwar, yourself, if you'd like to leave your website address and any other additional information that you think our listeners would benefit from learning on the call right now, where should they reach out to you if they need to connect with you?
Sure. My website is www.visram, so that's V as in Victor, I, S as in Sam, R, A, M as in Mother, visramsecurity.com. They can reach me directly on my cell phone if they need to at 778-888-8698. I have a number of speaking engagements that are currently under works. South Africa later this year, Switzerland, Singapore, and San Diego, and New York. So they're all still underways. If you contact me directly, I can let you know when they're finalized, and I can hopefully be able to reach out to you then. And I really welcome anyone who has any questions. We covered a kind of a breadth of topics today, so there's probably a lot of questions. Please feel free to reach out to either of us. I mean, and I'm sure we'd both be happy to answer any questions and work with you in whatever capacity that we're able to.
Indeed. Thank you both very much. Wishing you both continued success. Do appreciate your time today, and we definitely look forward to chatting with you again in the near future. Gentlemen, Anwar, Frank, thank you again. Bye-bye now.